You won't believe what happened on my ranch the other day. It all started when I caught Karen stealing crops right off my land. Yeah, you heard that right. This wasn't just some casual misunderstanding. She was taking my hard-earned produce without permission, all for her son. At first, I thought maybe she just needed a little help, but things quickly spiraled out of control. Instead of admitting she was wrong, Karen did the unthinkable. She called 911 on me. Can you imagine that? Me, the ranch owner, getting threatened with arrest because I caught someone stealing. It felt like I had stepped into a crazy movie, but unfortunately, this was very real. The whole situation turned into a tense standoff, with Karen insisting she had every right to be there and that I was the one causing trouble. I was just trying to protect what I worked so hard to grow, but she flipped the script, trying to make me look like the bad guy. It's wild how quickly things can escalate when misunderstandings and bad decisions collide. I was left standing in the middle of my own property, stunned and unsure what would happen next. This story isn't just about crops or a simple dispute. It's about how quickly trust can break down between neighbors, and how sometimes people will go to extreme lengths to protect their own, even if it means pointing fingers the wrong way. I'm about to share every detail, what led up to this, how I caught her in the act, and the fallout after the 911 call. You'll see why this wasn't just a petty argument, but something that could have serious consequences for all of us. Stay tuned, because what happens next might just surprise you. Who really had the right on this ranch? And how will this whole mess end? You don't want to miss the next part. Before all this drama unfolded, things between Karen and me were complicated, to say the least. We live in a small community where everyone knows each other, and for the most part, neighbors look out for one another. But Karen has always been a bit difficult to get along with. She's the type of person who's quick to jump to conclusions and slow to admit when she's wrong. I knew her son was struggling a bit lately, and I figured maybe she was just trying to help him out. That's why I didn't jump to anger right away when I first saw her near my crops. But when I caught her actually pulling vegetables from the ground without asking, something inside me snapped. I took a deep breath and approached her, hoping we could talk it out. I thought maybe there was a misunderstanding, or maybe she needed help and didn't know how to ask. But Karen's reaction shocked me. Instead of apologizing or explaining, she got defensive right away. That's when things started to get tense. She insisted she had permission from someone else, someone who doesn't actually live on this ranch, and that she was just doing what any mother would do for her kid. I tried to explain that this land and these crops are my livelihood, that what she was doing was stealing, plain and simple. Then, out of nowhere, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. I couldn't believe it. She was calling the police on me, acting like I was the one causing trouble on my own property. It was wild. The dispatcher stayed on the line, and soon the local sheriff was on the way. I stood there, heart pounding, wondering how this mess was going to unfold. Karen was standing her ground, and the tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife. I kept thinking, why would she risk so much over some crops? What was really going on with her and her son? And why did she want me arrested? The whole situation felt like a ticking time bomb ready to explode. But what happened next completely changed everything. As I waited for the sheriff to arrive, my mind raced through everything that had led up to this moment. I knew the crops were more than just plants to me. They were the result of months of hard work, early mornings, and late nights out here on the ranch. Losing even a small part of the harvest could hit me hard financially. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's actions were coming from somewhere deeper. Maybe it wasn't just about the crops. Maybe her son's struggles had pushed her to desperate measures, and now she was trying to protect him at any cost. When the sheriff finally pulled up, the tension only thickened. I explained my side calmly, showing proof that this was my property and that I hadn't given permission for anyone to take from it. Karen told her story too, one filled with frustration and worry for her son. She claimed she was only trying to provide food for him, that he hadn't had a proper meal in days. I wanted to believe there was some truth in her words, But the fact remained that taking crops without asking wasn't the right way to handle things. What made the situation even more complicated was that Karen's story began to stir up whispers in the neighborhood. Some folks started sympathizing with her, saying maybe I was being too harsh. Others backed me up, reminding everyone that property rights matter and stealing isn't the answer no matter the reason. The divide in the community was growing, and I found myself stuck in the middle of it, wondering if this was going to damage my relationships with neighbors I'd known for years. Meanwhile, Karen's son became an unexpected part of the story. Rumors about his situation surfaced, talks about job loss, health problems, and even trouble at school. Suddenly, this wasn't just a simple theft anymore. It was a tangled web of hardship, pride, and survival. I couldn't help but feel torn. Was Karen's anger really just a mother's desperation, or was there something else going on behind the scenes? With the sheriff still trying to figure out what to do next, the tension didn't ease. Neither of us wanted to back down, and it felt like this conflict was far from over. What would happen when the law got involved? And how would this all affect my ranch, my reputation, and my peace of mind? The answers weren't clear, and that made everything even more unsettling. The air felt heavier than ever as the sheriff stood between us, notebook in hand, listening to both sides over and over. I could see the frustration in his eyes. This wasn't the kind of call he wanted to deal with. Karen's voice was sharp, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and fear, insisting again that I was trying to bully her and that she had every right to take what she needed for her son. I stayed calm, but inside I was boiling. How did it come to this? How did a few stolen crops turn into a battle where I was the one being accused? Around us, the tension seemed to ripple out into the community. Neighbors had started showing up, whispering behind hands, watching from fences or windows. Some nodded in my direction, others looked sympathetic toward Karen. The quiet ranch that used to be a peaceful place was now filled with suspicion and doubt. I kept thinking about how much I wanted this to end without any trouble, but deep down, I knew that wasn't likely. Karen suddenly dropped a bombshell. She said there were others who had been helping themselves to the crops, that she wasn't the only one struggling. That opened a whole new can of worms. If others were involved, what did that mean for my ranch? Would I have to face more theft? How would I protect what was mine if even the community was turning against me? I could feel my heart pounding as the sheriff took note, clearly weighing his options. Then came the moment that changed everything. Karen's phone rang, and she answered it quickly, whispering something urgent. Her face shifted from anger to panic in seconds. She turned toward me, eyes wild, and said, "You don't understand what's at stake here. This isn't just about crops. It's about survival. You're making enemies you can't afford." I swallowed hard, realizing this was bigger than I ever imagined. The calm before the storm was over. Whatever was coming next was going to shake everything I thought I knew about Karen, her son, and my ranch. The sheriff looked between us, ready to make a decision that could change everything. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken threats and uncertain futures. What would happen when the truth finally came out? And who would walk away from this battle unscathed? The answers were just out of reach, and the tension was unbearable. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more intense, the sheriff's phone buzzed. He stepped aside and answered it quietly, but I caught a few words that made my stomach drop. Reported disturbance, previous complaints, and then something about possible trespassing by multiple people. Suddenly, the whole thing felt bigger than just Karen and me. It wasn't just a one-off incident. There was a pattern here, something that had been brewing under the surface for a while. Then Karen, who had been quiet for a moment, leaned in close and dropped a bombshell that took me completely off guard. She admitted there was someone else behind all of this, someone who had been encouraging her to take the crops, someone who might have been stirring up trouble between us. She wouldn't say who exactly, but the look in her eyes told me this was more than just a neighborly dispute. This was personal. At that moment, a car pulled up at the edge of the ranch. A man stepped out, someone I hadn't seen before in the neighborhood. He looked tense and wary as he approached us. The sheriff recognized him immediately and called him over. It turned out this man had filed complaints about theft on the ranch before, but what surprised me was that he wasn't just a bystander. He was connected to Karen's story in a way I never expected. Apparently, he'd been involved in some questionable dealings around the area, and now his name was coming up as a possible instigator behind the recent thefts. The stakes just skyrocketed. What started as a simple confrontation over stolen crops had quickly morphed into something far more complicated, a web of suspicion, divided loyalties, and hidden motives. I realized that whatever was going on wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about power, control, and maybe even revenge. And the people I thought I knew were suddenly strangers in a story I wasn't prepared for. With the sheriff caught in the middle, the neighborhood watching, and secrets unraveling faster than I could keep up with, I knew one thing for sure: this was far from over. The next move could change everything, and I wasn't sure who would come out on top. The tension in the air was thick as the sheriff finally gathered everyone's attention. After hearing both sides, reviewing the evidence, and speaking privately with that mysterious man who had shown up, he laid it out straight. Karen's actions, taking crops without permission, were wrong, no question. But the bigger picture was more complicated. That man had been encouraging several people, including Karen, to take from my ranch, stirring up trouble to create chaos in the neighborhood for his own gain. Apparently, he had grudges against several landowners and was trying to manipulate the situation to get them evicted or lose their property. Karen wasn't just a desperate mom trying to feed her son. She had become a pawn in this larger game. The sheriff warned everyone that theft and property damage would not be tolerated, but also that he understood the pressures many were under. He suggested a community meeting to discuss solutions, like food assistance and support for families in need, instead of taking matters into their own hands. It felt like a small win. The conflict was being addressed, and the neighborhood might find a way to heal. As for me, I was relieved that the sheriff recognized I had every right to protect my ranch, but also humbled by how tangled this all had become. Karen apologized, admitting she hadn't realized how much harm her choices caused, and promised to get help for her son the right way. For a moment, it seemed like things might finally calm down. Then, just as I thought the worst was behind us, the sheriff pulled me aside quietly and showed me a text on his phone from the man who'd come earlier. It was a threatening message, warning me to back off or face serious consequences. Suddenly, this wasn't over. That man wasn't done yet, and now I was a target. The peaceful ranch life I once knew had shattered, replaced by a dangerous game I didn't ask to play. The question now was clear. How far was I willing to go to protect what's mine, and who would stand with me when things got even darker? The story wasn't finished, and the real fight was only just beginning. After seeing that threatening message, I realized protecting my ranch wasn't just about fences and crops anymore. It was about standing firm against intimidation and fear. I decided to take the sheriff's advice seriously and get the community involved. We organized a meeting where neighbors could talk openly about the struggles they were facing, like food insecurity and financial pressure. It wasn't easy at first. Old grudges and mistrust hung in the air, but slowly, people began to listen. Karen showed up too, apologizing again, and explaining how much she wanted to make things right for her son without causing harm. The truth is, this whole situation taught me a lot about patience, empathy, and the importance of communication. I realized that sometimes people's actions come from places of desperation, not malice. But I also knew that protecting what you've worked hard for is essential. Boundaries matter, and so does respect. The man who tried to stir up trouble was eventually investigated further by the sheriff's department, and with the community's support, his influence started to fade. That was a relief, but I stayed vigilant, knowing that challenges like this can come back if we're not careful. Looking back, the experience changed how I see my neighbors and my role in this community. Instead of building walls, I learned that sometimes you have to build bridges, even when it's difficult. And while I never want to go through something like this again, I'm glad it forced us to talk and find new ways to support each other.